Uh, Good afternoon and good evening for some of you. It's really a pleasure to address this conference that confirms one more year of hard work by the Commission and by Barthélemy Kwame and the team, which I really would like to thank on behalf of all of us. Of course, this conference is linked to the name of Babacar NDIAYE. Babacar NDIAYE is our inspiration. And it is also very important for us to remind our constituency that his commitment to development and his commitment to transformation in the continent was very much linked to real, practical infrastructure development, hence the need for the road builders to actually associate the prize to something that is very tangible to the thinking of Babacar NDIAYE, which is to contribute to infrastructure developments in the continent, given the role that they play in the economy and the social transformation of everybody's lives. As I mentioned in the preparatory conference, I was involved in the Dakar Infrastructure Financing Summit in June 2014, a summit that was chaired by President Macky Sall in his capacity as President Coordinator of NEPAD. He decided to have such a conference to push and advance the high impact projects across the continent, including those of integrated corridors with a regional dimension. This to enhance ambitious national and transnational projects that have been presented each year by NEPAD and different agencies for financing, and we're having difficulties mobilizing the required financing. I must confess that since 2014, the progress that we have achieved on infrastructure projects, although spectacular, has not yet touched the nerve center, which is this regional impact-related infrastructure projects. And that's why we continue to insist that the 16 most important regionally impactful projects of infrastructure require a quantum leap, a change in attitude for us to be able to benefit from transnational arrangements, cross-border arrangements, because those are the ones who are going to propel African integration. And as we know, we are entering into a very interesting phase of political mobilization for Africa's integration. And at the time, the NEPAD, the CEO, Ibrahim Mayaki, my colleague and friend, and myself, in my capacity as the executive secretary then of the Economic Commission for Africa, we presented a book with the most impactful projects. And this book was an attempt to demonstrate that we have bankable projects, even on the regional dimensions. So it's not a question so much of what we want, but what we need to put in place for implementation to follow our great ideas. It was a way of dispelling the narrative that Africa lacks prioritization in this area. And even when the priorities exist, like with PIDA, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, there is always talk about lack of bankable projects. In fact, Africa lacks other things, not priorities. And it is therefore important to check what really Africa lacks and why are we having so much difficulty mobilizing financing. Of course, money counts, but money is not everything. The good news, though, is that according to figures released by the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa in 2018, the level of Africa's infrastructure commitments has exceeded 100 billion for the first time, which represented a 24% increase from the previous year, 2017. We still don't have the figures for 2019, but I would assume that 2019 was not a bad year either, although as we know, 2020 is highly affected by COVID. Everything is delayed between 3 to 6 months. African governments were the main source of this financing, with 37% of the total commitments, followed by China, which committed about a quarter of the total. On its part, the private sector only contributed 12%, and this is rather modest, and this is where the problem lies. That's why we need to mobilize more. In fact, these figures represent an increase in financing commitments across all sectors, but they also demonstrate that there is some winners, and amongst them, the ICT sector in particular follows the hard construction. So ICT, which is very important for our future, is actually mobilizing a lot of money, and it's mostly coming from the private sector. So the private sector seems to be much more at ease with soft infrastructure than with hard infrastructure. Even with a significant increase in commitments, there remains a financial gap that the African Development Bank now estimates can be around 90 billion a year. So we need to mobilize much more. And we need also to look into areas that nobody seems to be very interested, like water and sanitation, which has the largest financing gap of all sectors. And it's so important for our health. And we know that because COVID is alerting us and making sure we understand the importance of health as a threat, even for how much we have performed economically. But money is not the main issue that we have to confront. I want to confirm to you that part of the problem with accelerated private sector involvement in infrastructure in Africa is really related to the lack of appropriate policy, legal and regulatory frameworks that can facilitate financing and cross-border infrastructure. There are many factors that contribute to this. One of them, of course, is colonial legacies in law, in language, different business environments, some of our political challenges, geographical hardships, even capacity to deal with preparatory stages of a project that intimidate private sector interest in cross-border infrastructure. But given the high potential for significantly increased private sector investment, our efforts must be concentrated in structuring infrastructure to meet these requirements. And this is not something that is a rocket science. We can do it because we have been able to do it at the national level quite competently, as the winner of this year's prize, Egypt, demonstrates. The time required to properly develop and structure infrastructure projects normally is very long, and we need to shorten it. We need to make sure that we introduce more innovative mechanisms like the public-private partnerships that have been abandoned, and sometimes because of lack of funding, but mostly because of poor design and because they were not commercially viable, giving a bad name to PPPs because they were not properly done and they were properly implemented. What is impeding us from attracting partners of weight, managing an amazing excess savings that we already have, like in our pension funds, is largely our lack of competent governments. And of course, they play a very important role. If you don't have the competency to make sure that, for instance, all our saving structures trust their own countries, trust Africa, we are highly dependent on external financing. And this external financing obviously is very difficult to mobilize because of the long-term nature of infrastructure, but also because of all the risk perceptions that are associated with us. We know a lot of them are true, but we also know that a lot of them are exaggerated or not completely misplaced, but distorted. And as a result, we suffer from this risk perception. And the only way we can reduce it and de-risk is by making sure that state intervention is done in a smart way. It's comprehensive. It defines infrastructure in a value chain knowledge, traditional types of infrastructure, anything from energy to public transport, buildings, water supply, and the like, are part of a policy that is integrated of transformation. So it is convincing that is not just a white elephant and that this is something that really is worth entering into because the partnership is well defined and because the window for making the right choices is uncomfortably narrow, but this government or that government has demonstrated the capacity to lock in of capital, to understand the technology, to have the right choices, all of them demonstrating this management and strategic capacity. I believe we have an historic opportunity to deliver inclusive economic growth. We can eliminate poverty and reduce the risk of climate change, all combined. So we need integrated policies. And as I said before, more money alone wouldn't do the job. A range of barriers must be tackled to raise the quantity and the quality of infrastructure investment. And according to the Global Commission on Economy and Climate, to which I belong, we desperately need urgent attention in 4 interlinked areas. The first, we need to tackle fundamental price distortions. The second, we cannot hide anymore behind inadequate policy frameworks. We need good policy frameworks. The third, we must transform financial systems to deliver the scale and the quality of investment needed in order to augment financing from all sources, including our own domestic sources. And finally, 4, we must ramp up research and development, our own research and development, to contribute to solutions that will reduce the costs and enhance the accessibility of our infrastructure by using frugal innovation, things that we can actually afford to do, not necessarily the most sophisticated platforms, but also rather the knowledge of how to use the sophisticated platforms combined with our own frugal innovation. I think we all are aware that climate change could increasingly disrupt critical systems. We know that this is true. We know that we can do something about it. We know that we can find a range of responses, infrastructure related, that are capable of taking into account climate change, like for instance, on energy using renewable energy, on construction using sustainable construction materials and the like. We have, in one word, to leapfrog. We have to go from being the ones that are behind for the situation where we can afford to actually not commit the mistakes of all that are in between and join the pack that is at the lead in terms of introducing certain types of technologies that are low carbon and that are capable of responding with less costs, and sometimes in the case of renewable energies, even with more employment, to the challenges that we face. And of course, COVID-19 has just demonstrated in a dramatic way the importance for us to accelerate some of these choices, to make sure that we understand that COVID-19 is basically a consequence of our relation with nature. And this is going to not just be one episode, it's something that is going to be part of our life, that we have to deal with the consequences of many such viruses being capable of mutating, because these mutations that used to take 100 years to produce, now because of connectivity, but also because the environment is being stressed by the interventions of humans and also by the extension of industrial activity, but also urbanization, it's likely to mutate much more faster, and therefore our capacity to understand and respond is going to be challenged all the time. So I think on behalf of all of us, we need to really thank the Commission for the work that they have done. We have to congratulate Egypt for winning this prize. And we have also to thank our patron, President of the African Development Bank, Adesina, for being supportive of this effort. So we can now, in this conference, at the margins of the general meeting, once again, give the tribute that Babacar NDIAYE deserves. Thank you.